Alopecia areata can be a very distressing condition. It causes you to lose your hair, and that hair loss can be very severe. But there is hope. There are ways that we can combat alopecia areata and help you to grow your hair back. This is Dr. Dwala Mota Nelson, your healthy scalp specialist. When you're diagnosed with alopecia areata, the first thing that you feel is stress. You stress because we know that alopecia areata does not have a cure. It's one of those autoimmune conditions that does not have a cure. It's not listed to have a cure. But we do know that if caught early enough, there are steps that you can take to start to grow your hair in and grow your hair back healthy. So let's talk about first, if you have a diagnosis of alopecia areata. It affects your physical life, it affects your emotional life, and often it affects your social life. And so I wanted to speak to those things because this particular autoimmune disease, it affects so many people. Men, women, girls, boys, does not matter. Does not matter the age, does not matter the nationality or where you might live. It is something that affects all of us, all over this entire globe. And so it's really important to understand that it's not just a physical condition, it's much deeper than that. So with alopecia areata, of course, physically, you'll start to see that you have areas on your scalp that hair is not growing. Sometimes when you see that, you look the other way and you say, hey, I don't want to deal with it. I don't have alopecia. Some people tend to have denial about it and they don't want to discuss it. Their family members might notice that there's a physical change in their scalp or their hair, and their family members might bring it to their attention and they will say, I don't want to talk about it. I know that it's there, and they want to ignore it, but that's really not the right thing to do. If you start to see that you have hair loss, the best thing to do is see a dermatologist as soon as possible, or talk to a healthcare professional also about your stress level. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. So that's the physical thing that happens, the physical life change that happens when you are diagnosed with alopecia areata specifically. So that's the physical piece. Now let's talk about the emotional piece. Often when you are diagnosed with this particular immune disorder, you start to feel stressed. A lot of people feel less beautiful or less attractive. You start to feel that your self-esteem really suffers from it because you don't feel as attractive. You start to feel depressed. So all of these things are very, very normal. So if you have been diagnosed with alopecia areata and you're struggling with figuring out how to deal with this condition and you're starting to feel these different types of emotions, they're very, very common. They're very common. You're not alone with feeling these feelings that you have. It's very common, but you still need to definitely look out and reach out to someone for help, whether it be a medical professional or a mental health specialist. Having a support system is really important when you're dealing with alopecia areata. Having people around you that are supportive, that are kind, that speak kindly to you, that don't make fun of the hair condition, that's really important to have those people around you. That's the second piece, the emotional piece. And then the social piece. I have found that clients that are really struggling with alopecia, they tend to stay away from family members. It might be that you can take notice of, say, if there's a family member that you know that might be having hair loss issues or might be dealing with alopecia. Maybe they don't come to the dinners that you have, or maybe they don't come to an outing or a family event or come to a birthday party. And you're wondering, oh, well, why didn't they come? It could be that they are really embarrassed about alopecia areata or about how their hair is looking or how their scalp is looking. Some people love to wear wigs and they think that, covering their hair with the wig will kind of get rid of that stigma or the feeling around it. But one thing I've noticed is that when you take your wig off, you get to see the truth about what's happening with your scalp. You get to face that truth by yourself, whether it's, you take off your wig in the bathroom or when you look at yourself in the mirror. That's really hard. And so alopecia can be really, really hard for people who are social. It can be really hard for mothers and dads. In my opinion, it's not a condition that should be looked at in a very light way or made fun of, because losing your hair is very much tied to your self-esteem. And it's also tied to your emotional well-being. So just keeping those things in mind, that if you know someone who is dealing with alopecia, that they probably are trying to tackle it and they could definitely be struggling, it will be helpful for you to be a good soft place for them to land during this season for them. So what are some emotions that you might notice your friend or yourself that you might be having if you're dealing with alopecia. You might feel lonely. You might feel angry. You might have fear that someone's going to notice and find out that you have alopecia. You might be embarrassed that you're experiencing hair loss. You might have guilt. You might feel like it's something that you've done to cause your hair to fall out. Your self-esteem might be hurt by it as well. And you might blame yourself and say, well, what did I do? Maybe I should have gotten relaxers. Maybe I should have not combed my hair as much. Maybe I should have brushed my hair when I was younger. All these things go through your mind when you have a diagnosis of alopecia areata. You're not alone in thinking that way. I'm sure that most people that get a diagnosis of alopecia areata, the first thing they ask is, what did I do wrong? Or how did this happen? You want to get at the base of why it happened. And that's a good question to ask. So if you have not been diagnosed with alopecia areata, I definitely recommend seeing a dermatologist or seeing a scalp specialist that can really give you some insight on if your scalp looks healthy, if it's alopecia induced by stress, if it's alopecia induced by chemical or heat burn to the scalp. So that professional can tell you what your scalp looks like and give you an idea of why you are experiencing alopecia. That's really important. But all those emotions that we named, being embarrassed, feeling upset, being angry, all those things, all those are very normal emotions that lots of people experience when they realize that they're dealing with or diagnosed with alopecia areata. And feeling those emotions is absolutely normal. But the most important thing is, getting the diagnosis, making sure that you know for sure that it is alopecia you're dealing with, not just hair loss that you might be dealing with, but if it's alopecia, you want to be vigilant. You want to be specific. You want to be able to tackle it head on and not wait for 2 or 3 months down the road, because alopecia doesn't usually get better by itself. It's not something that just clears up on its own. It normally gets worse before it gets better. And so it's important that if there is a diagnosis of alopecia, that you start to treat it as soon as you notice it. As soon as you see the early onset little lesions on the scalp or the early onset types of characteristics of alopecia, you want to start to treat it as soon as you see that. You don't want to wait and set it aside and don't deal with it at that point. Some people that do have alopecia areata, when they go to dermatologists, I've heard this story so many times from my clients. I was diagnosed with alopecia. I went to my dermatologist and they put steroids into my scalp. I'm not a big advocate of steroids to begin with, but putting steroids onto your scalp is not something that I really agree with. I don't really think it's the best way to tackle alopecia. People can have a difference of opinion when it comes to that. It may work for some people, sure. I've heard that people have had really good experiences with it, but most of the people that I've talked to have not had a good experience. Injecting steroids into the scalp was not a good experience for them physically. It was very stressful and it didn't work for them. It didn't cause their hair to grow back. It didn't cause them to lose less hair. But I know that using corticosteroids on the scalp is one of the main go-tos or the main types of treatments that are used by dermatologists to treat alopecia. I tend to want to use things that are more natural. And so with our treatments for alopecia, we really try to use more natural approaches like acupuncture. We use essential oil blends. We use massage. And we try to be a lot more gentle with the scalp than doing needle types of injections of steroids. In general, steroids are really not that great for your body. And so to inject them in your scalp and it's right near your brain, it just makes me a little bit nervous. So I always say, of course, get more than one opinion. You can try it out if that's what your dermatologist decides that they want you to do. But personally, it's not something that I would recommend. A question is often posed also, what do you do to take care of alopecia if you've been diagnosed? One of the most important things you can do is to try to make sure that your scalp is nice and healthy, that you've cleaned the excess sebum from the scalp, that you don't have a lot of chemicals and a lot of product on the scalp. You want your scalp to be as clean as possible, as healthy as possible to give it the best chance to grow hair. We have a scalp detox, Dr. Topical's scalp detox, and it does have salicylic acid in it, which really helps to cleanse the scalp, cleanse the pores, clean out all of that sebum that might be stuck down in the pore that's keeping the hair from coming up. We always recommend that if you have bald spots on your scalp to start that growth. And then it's important that you give your scalp the nutrients that it needs. And so just making sure that you're putting the right kind of nutrients on the scalp. If your scalp is not clean and if you don't have a detox that you've done on your scalp, you can apply anything that you want to that scalp and your hair is not going to grow. So you need to make sure that you're cleansing your scalp well before you start any type of treatment or serum or application to the scalp. You want to make sure that your scalp and your pores are as clean as possible. That will be step one on any type of program or any type of restorative hair growth system that you're using, is to cleanse the scalp well. You need to cleanse the scalp well. If you're thinking about trying to combat or trying to fight alopecia and you're considering doing some type of natural formula for that, I would recommend that you try Dr. Topic Oil's Scalp Detox as a starting point, and that will help you to be able to get your scalp as healthy as possible before you start to do any type of serums that you're adding to your scalp. This is Dr. Dwella Moten Nelson, your Healthy Scalp Specialist.